coming up to the 5 minute mark. So, David, why don't I hand over the reins to you? Would you please go ahead and start the day? But I will just say good morning or good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for coming on.
Can I just confirm everybody can see the screen?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, it's actually quite nice that we got quite a small number because I think it would be a bit challenging with lots and lots of people on because I hope that this will be hugely interactive. Um, Now, just give a bit of background to the way in which I come from it. Part of my misspent career was actually as a fairly senior level planner. And so I look at things, though I'm not sort of psychometrically oriented that way, in a much more structured planning approach. And therefore, for those that aren't particularly comfortable with sort of very detailed plans, apologies, but it's the way in which I try and tackle problems. And there are other ways of dealing with it. But we'll try this particular approach and see where it takes us. Now, whilst I've got a PowerPoint presentation, I'm not going to put it into presentation mode because I actually want to literally, as people throw things at me, write ideas and comments on the slides themselves as we go from slide to slide. And so hopefully we'll build up a picture, get agreement, identify where things might be modified or changed, and also try and get across the concept that these plans, if I can put them that way, are highly flexible and can be manipulated and adapted to wherever they need to be utilized. They're just a tool, like a pencil. And so we can use it in whichever way we want to use it. So the first part of the conversation is about the methodology that I and Hart have used. Now, one of the greatest failures of many sort of initiatives has been the failure to really understand what the problem was. And a lot of people have an idea of what the problem is and then start making plans about how they're going to tackle the problem. But actually, once they start to try and enact that or try and do something to deliver it, it all falls over because they really didn't understand what the real problem was in the detail needed. So the understand bit happens at every level of this process. Um, and a couple of points. One, I think this is where the Great Collaboration website could be absolutely vital because in order to understand, you need to have the information available to make that understanding and to make the decisions that you are going to do in terms of the plan you're producing. The other thing is less writing and more action. I can't, the number of huge detailed plans I've seen sitting on people's bookshelves, having cost tens, maybe in some cases, hundreds of thousands of pounds to develop, and actually sit there doing nothing because actually far too much time has been spent writing lots and lots of words as opposed to just identifying the key components and just getting on with it. But the key thing is about being iterative. In other words, that didn't work. Okay, let's go back to the drawing board again. Let's re-understand what the problem is and go back to the plan to modify it in light of what we've identified and learned. Can I get, I just want to stop now and just throw it open to everybody. Any sort of major issues or problems with that, or is everybody reasonably happy for me to go on to the next bit?
One question, David, is whom do you test your understanding against?
You, when you're working as a team, sort of thinking this through, um, you are really developing a deep understanding within the team so that when you think you really have enough understanding of the problem, you can then start to develop the plan. But as you begin to develop the plan, you'll suddenly realize you don't have enough information. And therefore, you need to go back to the understand bit again. So internally, you're constantly cross-checking yourself and questioning what you're doing and whether this is going to work. If you really want to check it, the understanding, you could, of course, get SMEs to come in to add. And one of the things I would really hope with a great collaboration process is that there is a list of SMEs. And if you think, do I really understand this? Is that my understanding correct? Then you may want to go to an SME and go, is that correct? And then once you've actually cross-checked it, you can then move around the circle. So there's no clear, simple answer to that. But part of the understanding is the constant cross-checking as you're planning and actually actioning it, because you'll suddenly realize, oops, we didn't think of that. Any other points from anybody else?
I think it would help me if I knew exactly what you meant by understand. Do you mean you want to understand who you're trying to talk to, how to engage them? Do you need to understand climate change? Do you need to understand what barriers are? Do you need to understand how you can help? What sort of thing do you mean?
All of it. Because
Okay.
in order to make change, you have to understand all of those aspects. And it sounds it is huge, but it doesn't have to be all done in a day, and it doesn't have to be done at once. It's one of those iterative processes that you begin to pick up as you move through, trying to understand where you're going in the planning process. So I'll give a really trite example. I want to give a dinner party. So in order to plan for the dinner party, I need to understand who's coming, what their dietary requirements are, and what's the aim of the dinner party. Once I understand that, I can then start to plan it. So what ingredients, what are we going to cook? When is it going to be held? Where is it going to be held, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the understand bit. And it can be as simple as that, or it can be incredibly more complex than that, particularly when we're dealing with human factors, as you very, very sensibly brought up, Jackie.
So I could list a whole range of things, but I don't know what you want us to say.
No, it's really just, that's exactly the sort of questions I'm after is, what do you mean by that? And are you content that we will basically follow? So I'm pointing at my screen and pointing at it. I'll run my mouse. So basically, it's simply a set of steps which continuously go round and round in a loop. So we understand by gathering data. We then try and develop a plan. And then we might, whilst it goes round in this sort of circle, actually, you may need to flick backwards and forwards between the understand and engage for quite a while before you then go on to deliver. But once you deliver, you need to check what you're delivering against your understanding and also the plan, and then modify it. So it's a dynamic process or an iterative process.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that, because it's the same as environmental management to
Absolutely.
International standards, plan, do, check, act.
Yeah. Absolutely. When you look at all of these things, whether it's an audit or whether it's various other methodologies, they all follow exactly the same three principles. You can boil it down to three principles. Yeah. Okay, so happy with that one. So I'm not going to put on the whole.
David, there's lots of hands in the air, mate.
Yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
Just following on from what Jackie is saying, it might help some people if there's a sort of a review or check or something else point made clear between act and deliver. In other words, what went right, what went wrong. Then you might need some more data. I know that's subsumed in what you've got there, and it's not excluded. I'm just wondering out loud whether that might help some people. That's all.
Yep.
Could I just ask a point about the definition of the problem? Because some problems are not for us to solve, and it's a question of
I'll come on to that, Dave, in a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Madeline.
my biggest problem with understand is that it's not so much me understanding as understanding the problem. It's me understanding what other people see as the problem and understanding what they're willing to do. It's all part of it's all part of the engagement problem.
Madeline, you're absolutely right. And part of the wider, as was brought up earlier, part of the understand process is the human factors component. And I think what I'm finding is that there is increasing resistance and to, if you mention the words net zero and climate change, you can see the eyes glaze over. You know, and I do the pub check. So when I go down to the pub and start talking about what I'm doing on net zero, I have to keep it fairly brief, because you can see most people sort of immediately turning off to talk about more interesting things, like what was the rugby score, or what was the latest football score. So yeah, no, it's a huge issue, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail when we start to look at how do we actually start to make this work? How do we do this? How do we engage people? And that is a big part of the understand process. Yes.
And the issue has not been helped by the President of the United States, who has just run roughshod over everything, and everybody's going, so what's the point? Because the biggest,
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah. And it's just made things harder. But anyway, that's enough of that.
Okay, Graham. Graham, you're muted. If you want, you've got your hand up, Graham.
Yes, in theory, if you press the spacebar on your keyboard, it should unmute, but today it just refused to do so. I was looking at your PowerPoint from the point of view of people who are coming back to it later. And I'm not sure that it's clear to a newcomer that this is a constantly reiterated process, that you're going around this loop over and over. And I wondered whether you wanted to, exactly, put it in there. And otherwise, fine. Thank you.
What I didn't meant to mention is that these slides are actually uplifted on week 52 on the wiki, with a detailed explanation of what each slide and all this stuff means. So if later or now, if you want to just to have that in the background, please feel free to do that. Okay, let's go on to the next bit. As we're saying, the next bit is setting the direction of travel. When I first went to our first meeting in Hart, they just talked about climate change and net zero. And I haven't, and whilst I had this amorphous idea of what it meant, it was actually in its sense pretty meaningless, because what we require is something to provide us with a sense of direction. Now, some people are allergic to targets, but basically it's target setting. So what we've got to understand is, okay, so climate change is resulting from increasing CO2. What's producing the CO2? And more importantly, what CO2 is being generated by my particular district, or in our case, our parish or our town? Because ultimately, whatever we do has got to drive down the total CO2 that we are generating if we are to consider ourselves a success. And the only way to do that is to have some sort of measurement. Now, in Hampshire and Hart, they had consultants who did all this sort of clever stuff. But one of the presenters 3 weeks ago, I think from Oxfordshire, mentioned a centre in Bristol that you can go to, and they will give you your estimated CO2 output. And so I put down here as one of my thoughts and suggestions is, Where do you get this data from? And again, one thing for both the great collaboration would be to sort of work out where we can find this data, because I think there are engines on the net that you can put in your parish council or town council and come up with a figure for your particular geographical area.
Have you come across the impact tool from the Centre for Sustainable Energy?
No, I'll put that impact tool.
David, you can get it through Parish Online.
I'll put that down as well.
Appropriate parish.
But the thing about the impact tool is they've totally changed the methodology so that if you use it again, you get a totally different result. So you can't use it to monitor.
Oh, right. Okay. What's it? Which? So it's impact tool from the Centre of.
It's also with Exeter University. I mean, I just discussed this with Andrew the other day because I reran it for my parish and it was utterly different and completely different with respect to the rest of the district and the nation. And because they keep redeveloping the tool, it means you can't actually use any of these tools in this way.
Oh, right. Okay. So
There's
where?
no standard yet.
Yeah, there's no standard. Jenny, where was the?
Yeah, I haven't got the link. I mean, it's well known in the carbon literacy world because I got told about it at the carbon literacy training.
No, but you said it was the impact tool from the Centre.
Well, sorry, someone else maybe could
The
just
Centre for Sustainable Energy.
Maybe someone could just type the link in for you because it's a collaboration with academics.
I've just done that. Yeah, it's on the chat.
Right, fine. But yes, but I mean, although I've made a diagram of the thing just to show parish councillors and to make a pretty picture on a website that's waiting to be released, it doesn't actually achieve anything because what happens is you just get a very similar picture for anywhere and you can't deduce anything about it, to be honest. I've noticed that some areas are recommending other tools which may help and it may not.
I use.
I don't quite agree that the fact that the target is changing stops us using it, because it still gives you a numerical target. You might have to adjust that and do more or less as time goes by.
What I mean is,
trying to aim at.
Sorry, the point I'm trying to make is you can't, as it actually came up in the talk the other day about childbirth, you can't use it to say, oh, look, it's lower today. It's not lower because you've done anything. It's lower because the tool's changed.
That's true.
That's the point. You can't use it to do anything other than look at it and get a pretty picture and understand. But once you've understood it as an individual, to be honest, that's all you can do.
Okay, so there's a bit of work to find out the best source of information, because really this is a bit of a showstopper. If we can't get this right, then we frankly might as well just pack up and go home.
No, I don't think that's right at all.
No.
We know from global publications and constant communication from the government and the BBC what the main sources.
Yeah, but where do they get that? Okay, but what we need to do from us for our group is to find out what the best source of information is.
I don't think you need. I think you're going to have to accept. I mean, this has come up in again with private discussion with Andrew. We're looking at the website. You're not going to get more than what we'd call in science semi-quantitative at the very.
Yeah, agreed.
So all you need to do, to be honest, is explain to your community who some of who may know far more than some of us, what the basic problems are. You don't need an amount. I think having a consultant measure it doesn't make sense. You only need a detailed thing when you come to try to retrofit an individual house, for example.
Yeah, but the problem is,
agree.
I'm not so sure. I think whilst I'm all for I'm great for sort of chasing clouds of mist, but it's a fun thing. It's not actually something that's going to achieve very much.
No, but David, if I could just say about the impact tool, it does. If you look at any particular parish, it breaks down the contribution into housing and transport and food and all that sort of stuff, and it gives you a starting point.
Yeah, but Tristan, if I'm going to spend an enormous amount of money, and that's what it's going to be, an enormous amount of money and energy and time into something where I have no idea whether I've made a difference or not, why am I doing it?
No,
Well,
sorry.
yeah,
Can
no.
I just have a word
Yeah.
here? I think if you have a target like this, like you've got on your slide, which you can break down into housing and transport and whatever it is,
Yeah,
you can then start to take action. That's one side. That's what you're aiming for. You can then take action to say, you know, how much have I reduced my carbon input? How much have I reduced the use of gas? How much have I saved by
yeah,
planting
but
trees?
if I can't
And
measure that, Tristram,
well, you could no, that's a separate problem. So here we're looking at the target. As we progress with the actions we're taking, then yes, we have to be able to measure how much difference we're making.
can I
And that's
just
a different
pause? Can I
process.
just stop because I've got Madeline and Jackin who've had their hands up for quite
Oh,
some
sorry, yeah,
time.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, Madeline, do you want to come in on this?
I've used the impact tool. I think it gives you, like any tool, it'll give you a baseline. Because the data's not updated sufficiently often because it's not available in quite a lot of circumstances, it doesn't matter which tool you use. You're never going to get something which is accurate. And who knows if it's accurate anyway? You've got to be consistent. So if you use a particular tool, you've got to keep using that tool. And I agree with Jenny. I know I used it initially about 2 years ago and got some figures. And then I went back in at the beginning of this year, probably about March, and thought, oh, wonderful, it's all gone down. And I thought, no, it's gone down too much. So then I checked to see why it had gone down and realized that they had updated a lot of the data sets, which included, unfortunately, the data sets were then taken from the time of COVID, which meant that a lot of carbon dioxide there had been decrease in a lot of emissions because of COVID. But what it does do is, because all those data sets are the same for the different parishes across the country and within your area, what I can do is compare our parish with other local parishes and our parish with, so we're in Cambridgeshire, but in Huntingdon, the old Huntingdonshire. I can then look at Huntingdonshire as a whole and say, if you have a look at our emissions, we are higher for stuff. And the reason we're higher for stuff is relatively logical in that we are quite an affluent parish, and we're likely to be higher for the consumables and consuming things. Similarly, we're a rural parish, so our transport is going to be higher than it is for something based on a town, because we don't have a very good bus service, as I know a lot of you don't have. I've having been to these before, I know that's a big issue. So it gives you an indication, and with a bit of logic applied, it can give you, I agree with what David is saying, it does give you a starting point, and it gives you something that you can target in terms of saying, well, actually, I know enough about this. And it's back to that knowledge thing. You've got to know enough about the problem and enough about the basis of the problem in order to be able to say, right, I can't necessarily trust this as being what 100% accurate. It never is going to be, but it will give me an indication. But the biggest problem is then saying, how much have our actions had an effect? And I think the only way you can do that is by asking individuals to use their own carbon footprints, which are will give them an indication then of the difference that they have made by the changes they have done. So I think it's a two-level issue, in that you can look at area-wide stuff, but probably for individuals and to encourage people to take action, I think it's an individual issue rather than a group issue, if you like.
Okay, thanks, Madeline. Yeah, brilliant.
Okay.
Jackie?
I'd agree with everything Madeline's just said. In my working career, I've spent decades dealing with national data sets on energy consumption and CO2 emissions. I know how many assumptions there are in getting the data in the first place. You're never going to get it really accurate for a parish level. It's just an indication. So don't ever think you're going to get exact data. You're not. And so I wouldn't bother spending any more time. I'll give you an example. So in Napton, we're rural. We've got lots of CO2 for stuff. And for agriculture, I mean, the agriculture stats are sort of just averages nationally, but the farms in Napton, there are 4 organic farms and an agroforestry farm. So they're not normal, they're not average, they're not things. So if you've got something within your area that are not just the same as an average of the for UK, everything's going to be different anyway. It's just going to give you, you know, if we were the same as everybody, you know, the average in the UK, we'd be doing this, but we're not the average. Find out where you're not average and look at those areas.
Fabulous, thanks. Jenny?
Could I just add a point to those which very, very useful, and I agree with them, but it's slightly more subtle than that, because when I went back to the impact tool, which I'll use as my example because it's the one I used twice with the gap, we hadn't just changed massively, we'd changed with respect to other areas. So it no longer illustrated this idea that ditching's particularly bad because we're rich and our houses are very old, because the comparison with the rest of the district and nation no longer looks so unfavorable, if you see what I'm saying. So it's even cruder than has been mentioned, I'd say. And I agree, though, that in reality, you get people to use that, do their own footprint. One of our local areas, an area called called Stenning, they've got a group called Greening Stenning, and they've done their own version of the Great Collaboration in a way. They've asked people to do a survey, and then they've asked them to do it again, where they ask them, what have you done meanwhile? And that's a way of doing it. But even using different carbon footprint tools, I get radically different answers on my footprint. Some of them don't even attempt to calculate things that other tools do. There's much more uncertainty than anyone's even mentioned yet.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. That's great. Stuart?
Hi, I think we're tying ourselves in knots, trying to put a value on something which we can't really put a value on. I mean, I think that the best sort of measure of the CO2 is the one coming from Hawaii, which is showing it is going up and up and up. The rate of increase might have slowed a bit. We know what the problem is. We are putting too many greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and this is causing the warming. So maybe a better measure is how many people we can stop using gas for central heating, how many people we can stop using oil, how many sort of car journeys.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm a hard-nosed businessman and I'm a hard-nosed house owner, I've got a budget of X, and do I invest and change because of some nebulous idea, or do I change it because I'm going to save money, and as a result of going to save money, I'm going to save a little bit of CO2 generation? I think the problem is that whilst there are people who are absolutely 100% behind this, there are a huge amount of people who couldn't give a stuff. And I think if we're going to bring people along with us who are going to invest, you know, and you mentioned gas, Stuart, I mean, you know, putting in an air source heat pump, A, do they actually work? And B, am I going to invest 12 to £20,000 for what gain, apart from making my green credentials slightly better? So I think, can I park this for the moment now? Because I think what I'd like to sort of say, okay, from my perspective, we do need some sort of start measurement, but I would completely agree that that is going to be really challenging, and that what we might have to deal with is the scientific wise ask guess to start off with. But what we're looking for is a trend downwards. So if we start off at value X and we over time we get a value Y, that shows that whatever we're doing, we are contributing by whatever means we measure it. And the other thing that maybe we need to be starting to doing is actually asking some hard questions about the measurement tool. But I think that's a conversation outside of this particular conversation, but it's one that really needs to be brought forward. So I'm going to move on to the next step, if you don't mind, and make an assumption that we've got some idea of how much we're producing. The key next step is what is producing it. Because you know, what's the best way to deal with a really complicated big problem is to deal with it in small bite-sized chunks. And so we need to break it down into stuff that we can actually deal with. And Dave brought up an issue about, and this is where the issue is, we can't deal with everything, not at parish or town level. We can deal with something, but not all of it. So this is the data. This is where CO2 is generated by percentage through Hampshire and Hart. And it's broadly divided into those sectors. So we're looking at waste management, agriculture, the public sector, industrial and commercial, household and transport. So the blue is Hart and the other is Hampshire. So that sort of shows what Hart is contributing to those particular sector areas. And then what this light blue thing is about what can we contribute as a particular district to actually reducing those levels. So we have to have we have to make some fairly grown-up decisions about what we can tackle at a parish and town level. And when we had discussions at Hart, basically we decided, because the problem is so big, that whilst there's loads of things we could throw ourselves at, we at a parish level, and that was agreed sort of generally, is that we could actually have a major impact on the domestic sector because we could influence all sorts of things within our parishes and towns. There are crossovers. So, for example, if you as a parish or a town own property, you can do a lot of stuff to make sure that your own house is in order. For those with really rural communities, you might have a little bit of an influence in terms of what the farming community is doing. Waste management is definitely a district or district level issue until they all change. And we might have an impact in some of the industrial and commercial where they are present in our parishes. So really allows us to hone down and decide what we can tackle, because we can't tackle it all and we can't tackle it all at once. So any particular queries or questions or problems with that? Good.
So, did I understand that you're saying you're going to concentrate on the bottom two, the household and the transport, because they're the
no, we within Hart are just going to and within our parishes are going to focus almost exclusively on the domestic.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
But that doesn't stop any other parish or town or to refocus on what they want to focus on, because it's something they can get their hands around. But it's just a decision we've made because of, frankly, we don't have the manpower or the resources to tackle it all at once. We're limited by people enthusiasm and very little funding. So okay, so we've got, this is part of the understanding. So we understand what we're trying to do and what we're going to tackle.
David, sorry, where did that data come from?
From a bunch of consultants that were commissioned by Hart and also by Hampshire.
Right.
Now, the methodology that I'm going to use is fairly pictorial, and it basically starts off with a series of lines, which basically says we're going to do this first, we're going to do that next, then we're going to do that, then we're going to do that. Oh, we better think about this, and I'll come into this in a bit more detail. And then, so you've got a really high level overview of what you want to try and tackle, more appropriate perhaps at the district level than at our level. And then we're going to look at what we're going to do for the domestic sector and then break that down into various different components. And from that, we then develop action cards which allow us to get really into the detail. So there's a hierarchy of structure. It's simple to use. It's not thousands of sheets of paper. It's very flexible because you can do what you want to do with it, and it's very iterative, so you can constantly change it, adapt it. But it just gives you a structure to hang your hat on, and your thinking in order to deliver. And I'll go into more detail in this in a second, so don't worry about the detail. Just is everybody reasonably happy about the overall sort of approach?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So let's zoom in a bit more into the roadmap, the large scale roadmap. So, and this is for heart, it's not going to be the same for different, so it would need to be modified. In heart, it's already green because they've already done a massive amount of work to decarbonize much of the infrastructure within the buildings, both in terms of how they're heated, how they're insulated, and how they generate energy, including moving the fleet of refuse vehicles from diesel to electric. So they're doing an awful lot of work with that. That's of interest, but not terribly helpful for us as a parish. So we've decided that we would look at the domestic sector because it's something we could get our hands into and then start the process and get going with something tangible and relatively easy to start to deal with. Now, if you notice down the bottom here that there are other links to other things. Now, I heard someone talking about biodiversity and also a local tree strategy. So part of our approach is not only about reducing carbon output, but it's also trying to increase carbon absorption. But and we'll do that by enhancing biodiversity and by increasing the number of trees that we have. But in reality, if we go all the way back to this slide here, it actually makes not a it does do something, but it's not massive. So the reduction is the bit that we're going to have to focus on, because the greening is just going to, it's going to help, but not by a massive amount. The other bit that is really important that fell out of the understanding and the thinking through this is that if we're going to make any major changes, we are going to need energy in the form of green energy. So if we wanted to go down the air source heat pump route in terms of reducing gas, then you're going to need a significant increase in electricity generation in order to drive the air source heat pumps. Now, whilst there is a strategic national level drive to increase the amount of green energy generated, it's hampered in a massive way by the grid, which simply can't cope with the energy generation levels that are now being produced. And we saw last year something like almost £1 billion of electricity was wasted through the wind farms because we don't have the storage systems and we don't have the ability to move that energy through the grid. So one way of tackling that is by enhancing energy generation locally and by controlling and managing that energy locally. So the so what from that is that in parallel with trying to reduce CO2 generation from the domestic sector, we're going to have to significantly improve local green power generation distribution at the local level. Okay, open up for debate, discussion.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that on the local energy, David. There's been various attempts up until now, government level, to try and change the law so that it's more easily people can actually sell power locally that they've generated locally, rather than having to go through the grid, which, as you pointed out, isn't perfect. So that's an ongoing issue there. I have been told, and I can't remember where it was they were piloting it, if you've got a suitable substation, that it's not good for everybody, that you can make a deal with an energy supplier so that they take your generated energy at a good rate, but then resell it locally at a better rate than you can get from the grid. I think there have been some that hasn't gone very far nationally, because I think the people that were trying it have found some issues with it that I haven't heard the report of. So I think what we're right to be doing is looking at more ways in which we can establish that. I also think from all of the things that we're discussing here, the more traction we'll get from national government if we can show how what we're achieving locally. And I think to that extent, what we're talking about today is most important. The more we can show that local things at parish and town council are making a difference, I think the better for all of us.
Graham? Thanks, Andrew.
Andrew is actually quoting from last week's presentation, although you may not realize it, where they did come up with the fact that if you sell your locally generated power to your local community, you can probably get something in the order of, say, 30 pence per kilowatt hour. Whereas if you sell it back to the grid, you get 4 pence. So obviously what you want to do is to reduce everybody's local bills by selling them the power you're generating. And I agree that there's a massive problem in how you best do that, because nobody wants to rewire the local community. On the other hand, if your local substation has not got spare capacity, and a lot of them don't, then there doesn't seem to be an easy way of doing it. So I think it is a big issue. I suspect that a lot of people are working on it.
Graham, one of the thoughts that we've had when we've been delving into this green energy with Alex's team is the need potentially in the medium future to actually increase the amount of storage that we have locally. So in other words, you generate it, you store it, and then you feed it into the grid at a rate which the grid could cope with. And so that might be a way round the problem, but that needs a bit more number crunching and a bit more analysis. But before we get too sucked into the detail on the green stuff, I don't want to get into the solution solving at the moment. Okay, on the whole, I think everybody's reasonably content with that. So what I'll do is I'll move into the next step. So we're going to look at the domestic sector in a bit more detail. So we're going to break that down into a series of sort of work streams, if I can use that term. So we're now looking at the domestic sector, and in order to do anything, we need to focus our limited resources and funding on those properties, because we're now getting down to the property level, that really need our focus. So how best to do that? Well, our initial stab is to go, well, let's look at the SAP scores or the EPC scores, because it's not perfect, but it's a solution start point. And once we've identified those houses that really are quite poor on the SAP scores, then we can then focus on how do we retrofit and improve the insulation. Then how do we replace the gas boilers, which most of us have got, and with what? And then there are some people who use pretty old electrical systems still, which are very power hungry. And how do we do that? And I'm sure I've missed out components in here. And this is one which probably needs a bit more work in terms of understanding what else needs to be sort of added as part of really maximizing CO2 reduction within this particular sector. Madeleine.
I've used Parish Online to have a look at the EPCs locally, but most of them are so out of date that, you know, and you can't very well go around and knock on people's doors and say, oh, by the way, would you like to update your EPC? Because, you know, you need to know how much heat energy your house is losing. What we have done is to purchase a thermal imaging camera, which we loan out to residents, so that if they're interested and they want to, they can at least do their own analysis of what might be going on in terms of their insulation and so on. But the biggest issue for us is they then come back and say, right, well, I've identified this problem and that problem. What do I do about it? And it's that sort of link between being able to, because we don't feel as a parish council we can say, oh, well, you could try such and such, or you know, this company offer. It's finding that link between the householder and the people who do the retrofitting, and finding somebody who's reliable.
Right, actually, Madeleine, you strike a really, really good point. And this is experts, neutral expert advice. Because we need to source that. The other thing, just lifting the thermal imaging, you can not only thermal image by individual camera, you can do it by drone. So you can, if you wanted to do the entirety of your parish, you could actually hire someone to come in with a thermal imaging drone and go across the entirety of the parish. And I've also done some work with a satellite company who are specializing in infrared imagery for the UK. Now, unfortunately, their first satellite went down. And so they're about to send up two new satellites, and I'm in correspondence with them, because they can then do they can drill down right down to a parish level, and give you an image. So there are ways of actually looking at how much heat is leaking from your parish. But again, you see, I think Graham and Andrew, this is where, as part of the understand, this is the sort of thing that the website would be just brilliant, you know, showing if we wanted to understand how much leaking, what options are there, and who we could connect with. Parish Online also potentially might have some data on that. So we have that. So I've just taken some notes. Now, let's just drill into the EPCs. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail now. So we've gone from this, which is we need to improve our SAP scores, our understanding of our SAP scores. So how do we do that? Now, this is where we could perhaps get into a bit more detail, but I am really conscious of time, and so we may have to come back and revisit this. This is not the perfect solution. It's just a quick and dirty. So step one is and actually a lot of parishes even haven't done this step, which is we need to actually do something about it. And perhaps one of the things that was suggested at one of our meetings at the district level was actually setting up SME teams within the parish itself. So a set of volunteers, and you're amazed what skill sets exist within the parishes that could set up a small support team working group who are then the focus for actually sort of trying to get stuff done within the parish, enabling and going and visiting people. So you're absolutely right about the parish online. In our parish, our problem is that a large chunk of our buildings don't even have an EPC. They've been owned for so long, or as you mentioned, they're completely out of date. Now, what we're thinking of doing is actually going on knocking on doors. So creating a voluntary team who will knock on doors and say, we'd really like to get your EPC up to date. And they're going to go, okay, but who's going to pay for it? And we're just working on a way of actually potentially, if we could do a bulk buy, we may be able to get some funding from within the parish to actually undertake that SAP score work. And I've been set aside some monies within my parish budget. Now, whether I can use that for that, I've yet to ascertain. But now you can do it by getting somebody in to come and do the SAP scores. And yes, I know they're about to change, but you've got to start from somewhere. There are also other methodologies which are being explored now. So a lot of utility companies, gas and electric utility, are giving you smart meters to measure your electricity and gas consumption. One company has actually developed one that will actually give you an almost real-time estimate at the amount of energy you're losing. So they look at the energy you're using and how often, and then from that, with clever AI technology, they can actually say, well, actually, you're losing, at a rate of this, so your insulation level is this. So there are other technologies that we could use, but again, this is where the understand bit comes in, and the website comes in. What technologies are there out there that we could utilize to actually enhance and improve our understanding of the leakiness of our building stock? So that action card is just a single action card simply to get our SAP scores up to speed. Because once we know what we've got in terms of leakiness, we can then go on to the next step, which is improving insulation, retrofit. Now, again, where the great collaboration, the website could come in, there are lots of grants out there that can be utilized for various insulation activities. There's also understanding. I found this really, really interesting. If you actually look at this, of the heat losses, 25% through the roof and 35% through the wall. So that's accounting for nearly 60% of the heat loss of a house. Now, there is some through the floor, there is drafts, and there are windows. But when you then look at it, this is from the Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering. When you look at the payback periods, some of these are frankly not worth doing. So if you've got a single skinned wall, which some properties have, unless you're going to be completely refurbishing the house as part of a major overhaul because you just want to improve the quality of the house, actually retrofitting solid wall insulation is to most people not worth it, because if you look at the payback periods between 15 and 27 years. And so what comes out of it, as we all know, the principal focus of our insulation activities should be cavity wall insulation and loft insulation. But as one person brought up in another previous great collaboration meeting, one of the biggest friction points about getting loft insulation done is the amount of rubbish in people's roofs. And if you've got an 80-year-old who is fairly infirm, they ain't going to go up there to move their stuff in the roof out to get the insulation down. So one of the other factors is how do you actually, will the firm do it? Will that cost extra? Or do you have voluntary teams to actually help come in and move all the stuff out of the attic before the insulation goes down? And in some areas, there are voluntary teams that have been set up to do just that. But again, that would be a really good resource for the website to pull that in to meet that particular understand bit about how do you go about doing that. Now, the next bit I'm going to whiz through because we've now hit the witching hour, and I want to do it. So where we've got insulation, there's a whole bunch of work that needs to be done in terms of how do we go about insulating once we've got the SAP scores. So an action card needs to be developed and delivered. Now, again, you see, I think this is where the great collaboration could be really helpful. In fact, that we could set up working groups to actually develop those both across parish councils and within parish councils to provide a set of resources that people can pull down and modify to meet their own particular needs. And I'm going to pull stumps there because I think we've done more than enough today. And there's a shed load of other areas that need to be delved deeply into actually moving this forward. But I hope I've given you enough in terms of understanding how to approach it if you want to use the methodology, and then providing the resources that can be modified and used. And I have no particular ownership or copyright of anything of this is done. So I'm very happy for great collaboration to take all of this and use that as a solution start point in terms of guiding people like the old-fashioned wizards when you used to install new software on your computer, to guide people through this process, because actually hopefully it will cut out a lot of the oh my goodness, which is what we faced when we first sort of tried to look at the problem with a new set of eyes. Thought, how the hell do we tackle this? Okay, so that's me over to you, Graham.
Well, I think that's extremely helpful, David, because I agree that not only is there a lot that we can do at Great Collaboration at making this available to everybody in a way that they can just go through it and they'll see why you've come down to the conclusion that you need to concentrate on insulation, and then they can work with local suppliers perhaps to get a reduction in the rates because they're going to supply them with the names of sort of 500 potential customers where they don't have to do any marketing whatsoever. You've done the marketing for them. So I agree there's lots of scope here. I also think there's room for collating the information and moving it upwards. That we're having all these issues. We want somebody up in the supply world to help us sort them out. The energy suppliers can do a lot more about helping us use off-peak electricity, and the ideas of generating local power and storing it locally and using it when the grid is available. I think these ideas are a wonderful flow of information. I think you're going to egg that along with this sort of system. So thank you very much. Much impressed.
Any final points before I hold you over to Graham to close down? So I'm busy snatching everybody's great ideas and links and everything. So
it's a lot of stuff, of course, as you and I and others know, and it's great to be able to get it into words that actually can be transmitted readily. This is why I've been saying things about communication. Fortunately, we've managed to attract an intern, graduate student intern, to help us look at communication generally. So as the Irish comedian used to say, it's the way you tell them. You have to find ways of getting across, not just to parish and town councils, but from parish councils to individuals. So, yeah. So we do. I think you're absolutely right, David and Graham. We progress with this, but we understand what it is, and then the engaged plan bit will be to how do we tell them, how do we share it.
Yeah, I look forward very much to working with you in the future to make sure we make the most of this. So if nobody else has any contributions or questions they want to make, then thank you very much, David, for the effort that's gone into this. I really appreciate it. And I think we will be doing more of it, frankly. Thank you to everyone for their inputs. I really like the stuff in the chat session. Some of that stuff is really useful. They all get published on the website, hopefully rather faster than last week's did. And I look forward to seeing you for next week. Now, I'd love to be able to tell you what next week's topic is, but I've yet to work out what it's going to be. I'm waiting for answers from people who are saying they're just desperate to talk to us next week, but so far the reactions are few and far between. But I will let you know in due course. Thank you so much for coming today. Take care, everybody.
Just before we go, we have a pilot meeting next week. Andrew sent round a note about it, saying it's on Wednesday. My understanding was it's Tuesday.
Yeah, it's Tuesday. Yeah, you're right, and I'm wrong. Yeah,
Good.
We're sending emails in a hurry. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
David.
everybody.
Thank you
Bye.
all. Take care. Bye-bye.